Professor Jideofor Adibe is a professor of political science and international relations at the Nasarawa State University in Kefi. Very good evening to you, Prof, and thanks for joining us on Newsnight. Well, the 65th ECOWAS Heads of Government Conference just ended with the re-election of Nigeria's President Tinubu as chairman. How does this come across, to you as a professor of international relations and for Nigeria?
3, 4, 5.
Okay, Prof, I've just been told that you didn't quite hear me in the first time. I said the ECOWAS heads of government have just finished their 65th extraordinary session here in Abuja with the re-election of its chairman, that's Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu. How does this come across to you, and what is there for the development of the ECOWAS states?
Well, thank you very much. It is not really anything unusual. I can tell you that since 1999, every president of this country has been chairperson of ECOWAS, the authority of heads of states and prime ministers. Babangida, for example, was actually chairman of the authority for 4 years, that is from 1985 to 1989. Abacha was there for 2 years, 1996 to 1998. Yaradua was there for 2 years, 2008 to 2010. And Jonathan was there for 2 years, 2010 to 2012. So it's nothing unusual, to be re-elected. As a matter of fact, as I said, every head of state, every president, since 1999, and in fact, even Abdul Salami, I can't think of any of our presidents or military leaders who wasn't, with the exception of Mauritala Mohammed, because his regime was only 200 days. So it's not really anything unusual. Nigeria is still the powerhouse of ECOWAS, and it's only, the authority of heads of states and prime ministers, just 1 year renewable. So it's not unusual to be re-elected.
Yes, indeed, Prof, not unusual to be re-elected, and you cited very copious examples then. But today's ECOWAS is afflicted with, so much division, political intrigues or tampering with nations' constitutions, tenure elongations, and the rest. The decision by this 65th conference that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger will not be allowed to fragment the ECOWAS Union. What's the implication of these when the juntas of those countries have said they are forming their own Sahelian association?
Well, thank you very much. ECOWAS seems to be in a dilemma. Can you hear me?
Very well. Please go on.
Okay. I say ECOWAS seems to be in a dilemma. And this dilemma revolves around a core principle, which says it's not going to allow any unconstitutional change of power. Now, if you have to look at it in this way, military coups, there are 3 components to coups. One is a military coup, one is an electoral coup, whereby leaders rig elections to power, and the other is a constitutional coup, where leaders try to elongate their tenure. So you can see most of the leaders in the ECOWAS now, they have one form of legitimacy crisis or the other. Now, what is the dilemma the ECOWAS faces? Is either now they have to forgo this principle that says if you come to power through unconstitutional means, you will be excluded. Now, if you want now to say we are no longer going to enforce this strictly, you can then more or less try to keep a semblance of unity. If you want to enforce strictly that any leader that comes to power through unconstitutional means, you have to enforce it strictly, then that becomes a problem. Because most of the leaders themselves have questions to answer. And then if you want to enforce it, as the case of the three countries you mentioned, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, when they leave, they automatically weakens the body. And I think also the ECOWAS got its politics wrong by giving them 7 days ultimatum. I called it earlier the failure of what we call deterrence in international relations. For deterrence to be effective, it must be credible. In the case of ECOWAS, giving them 1 week to restore constitutional order, it was not credible. They had no standing force. They had no army, nothing around. So it was clear that it could not be enforced. And you had Wagner, you had Russia trying to step in, to replace the France that they were invading against. So they got the politics wrong. And now they decided to play counter politics by deciding to say, look, I'm leaving. So they have now all the aces. Will they come back? That's a big question. So what is ECOWAS going to offer them to make them come back? First of all, they are anti-France. And the President Tinubu, we know, is very close to France. So is he going to make it easier? Yes, he has appointed the president of Senegal to help in mediating. And don't forget that even Senegal, the former president Macky Sall, tried himself to elongate his tenure. So, and if you go across, several of the leaders, African leaders, have either tried to elongate their tenures or succeeded in doing so. So it is a very dicey situation. What are they going to offer? They are not in a position to help them fight the jihadists. They've been talking about setting up a $2 billion plus something dollars ECOWAS standing force. We'll see whether it works. After all, we have the Chad Commission, Nigeria Chad Commission, the four-nation multinational joint task force. We'll see to what extent has it been effective in the fight against
Professor Jidiofor, I was just going to, ask you to expatiate more on the West African Standing Force, $2 billion. With the economic constraints, in Nigeria, which is, of course, the giant amongst the 16 member states. How realizable is that? Yes, during the military regime of military president Babangida, an ECOWAS standing force called ECOMOG was possible then because of the clement economic situation. But today is quite different. Is it realizable?
Well, money is not just the only problem. Yeah, you are right about ECOMOG. Between 1990 and 1997, ECOMOG was very active in the Liberian. Have you lost me?
Oh, you're
can
very
you hear
much,
me?
On. No. We can hear you. Go on, Prof.
Okay. I said between 1990 and 1997, ECOMOG was very, very active in Liberia and helped. But both the international and the domestic environments are massively different. If you look at the entire Sahel is ravaged now by terrorism. That was not the case then. You can argue that Nigeria that powered it, even though under Babangida and later Abacha, you had a very, very fractured. There was no national consensus. The domestic elite was very fractured. It's not anything near as it is as fractured today. They were talking about different models of funding, and I think even if you put the funding on table, there will be other issues. Issues of do you necessarily intervene without the go-ahead of the United Nations Security Council? And what will be the position of our relations with our traditional allies, including France, which, the three countries now they want to replace. And in fact, they have already replaced them with former Wagner fighters. now known as I think, Africa Force. So there are a whole lot of problems. I'm not sure it's going to work, and even at the continental level, it's aspirational. It is setting up a regional force is part of Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter, which allows regional arrangements in the provision of security. To what extent will this work? I'm not sure, because at the core of it now is the existentialist crisis the ECOWAS faces, which has to deal again with the character. You know, a core principle is at stake. Do we now say, look, we want everybody to be together? We don't want, if you remove that clause that says we can't deal with any country that comes to power through unconstitutional means. If you remove it, then you give a semblance of unity. Anything goes. How would you know, you more or less accept that is a retrogression to democracy. If on the other hand you say we must enforce it strictly, who will remain? So it's an existentialist crisis that they are ECOWAS. I can't even see ECOWAS being able to fight jihadism successfully. Today, Burkina Faso has displaced Afghanistan as the top one most terrorist-infested country in the world, according to the Terrorism Global Index. So it's a very dicey situation. And then come back to Nigeria that has been funding it. Yes, the government claims that Boko Haram and terrorism and other terrorist elements have been degraded. Well, I think they've done something more in that direction. But then there's been a nexus between this, the banditry, which is growing, and terrorism, while terrorist attacks, as we knew it in a couple of years ago, apart from the recent attack in Borno, seem to have declined. Bandit attacks also scaled up, and people are saying there's been a lot of collaboration and exchanges. Some former terrorists becoming bandits, you know, because it's more lucrative.
Yeah, quite a handful there. The legitimate crisis in the West African sub-region seems to be snowballing into insecurity that, of course, Nigeria is not spared of. Thanks so very much, Professor Jideofor Adibe, as a professor of political science and international relations at the Nasarawa State University in Kefi.